Now, the escalating economic cost of oil theft in Nigeria amid oil price rally and global disruptions cannot continue unabated. Now, the federal government is not only talking tough, but taking actions this time around. In this report, we explore how much of a menace the illegal oil diversion is and the strategy of government to checkmate the trend.
Crude oil theft in Nigeria's oil-rich Delta region remains one of the biggest economic threats faced by the country. To say the least, the environmental implications hold far more devastating impact. The diversion of crude is a chain of business for cartel of anti-state forces. Now, this drain is cornered from the point of exploration, where thousands of the product are produced to known destinations, to multiple receipts of unimported number of refined petrol by some marketers, to diversion of the subsidized petrol to neighboring countries for high profiteering. All racketing thrives for the cartel. Nigeria lost $3.2 billion in crude oil theft between January 2021 and February this year. This puts the figure to about 1.36 trillion naira when converted to naira, with the official exchange rate of 416 naira and 25 kobo to the US dollar exchange rate, a development that has forced the country's crude oil production to go way below quotas by the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries and benchmark in the 2022 budget. Oil theft rose significantly between 2021 and 2022, with over 90% of total crude produced at the Bonny terminal stolen in January 2022. Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission says losses are recorded mainly from the Bonny Terminal Network, Forkades Terminal Network, and Brass Terminal Network. A 2019 report by the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative says that Nigeria lost about $42 billion to crude theft, as well as domestic and refined petroleum product losses from 2009 and 2018. According to a NATO report now, the losses include about $38.5 billion in crude theft, $1.6 billion on domestic crude, and another $1.8 billion on refined petroleum products.
It's really a receding capacity of the state to police the environment. You remember, government exists for a reason. So when the coercive power of the state is weakened for any reason, it becomes difficult. So, and there will always be criminals. Essentially, three levels of problems. There's the what we call the point of origin theft of crude, which means that the crude that was produced at the wellhead did not make it to the terminal, didn't get into the tanks. And then, of course, there's the point of export issues, which means that it made it into the tank, but it wasn't fiscalized, it's not paid for. And then, of course, there's the import issue. So across these three broad spectrum, we have problems.
Nearly 2 years after the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited announced plans to reduce the cost of oil production to about $10 per barrel, this effort has been frustrated by the recurring oil theft, spiking production cost to at least $32 a barrel. With losses from pipeline vandalism and theft overwhelming international oil companies, many are already moving to the deep offshore region, while indigenous firms contend with rising operational expenses driven mostly by personnel, maintenance, and security costs. Operators note that Nigeria's operating expenses lack competitiveness, as the country in 2019 had one of the highest production costs, with a break-even price for major proposed projects hovering at $48 per barrel, which is higher than Angola's $45 and Uganda at $44 per barrel. This necessitated the move for lower oil production costs in 2020, specifically the $10 a barrel target. Now described as an organized crime and a national disaster, government is not only talking tough but taking action, establishing more synergy with security apparatus and exploring technologies like satellite surveillance monitoring systems and much more.
Oil and gas is one of the major sustaining assets of our country. But unfortunately, you will agree with me that we have had a lot of insecurity around oil facilities and pipelines. This can no longer be condoned. There is still ground to cover. So let us all work together and protect these national assets for the good of all.
Well, actually, it's a value chain. Our drive is to look at the rungs of the ladder, the chain within the oil and gas space. So we are not just zeroing on those who are the actual criminals, but also that are those who are supporting them, those who are sponsoring them. Those are the ones, of course, we will also go after. This is not a forum for me to tell you the entire gamut of what our strategy will be in reining them in. But I can assure you that there is going to be a huge difference to the good of the state. I wouldn't deny that security agencies have been complicit, and I think that's the reason why I said our approach is going to be very comprehensive, and that's why we're here. And of course, I've also told members of the armed forces I'm going to be ruthless with anyone that is found to have engaged in the malfeasance. But I can assure you that at the end of it all, there will be greater improvement in the entire space.
While crude oil is currently hovering around $120 per barrel as a result of the supply shortage induced by the Russian-Ukraine crisis, the losses being suffered from oil theft is making it difficult for Nigeria to take advantage of the surge in global crude oil price. Despite being Africa's largest crude oil producer, Nigeria has recently been struggling to meet its quota set for by the Organization of Exporting Countries. According to OPEC figures, Nigeria's crude oil production declined to an average of 1.41 million barrels per day in February 2022. Now, this figure is about 463,000 barrels per day lower than the 1.88 million barrels per day approved by the federal government in the 2022 budget. In a bid now to curb the current volume of oil theft, the Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Mele Kyari, toured the forest and creeks in the Niger Delta region alongside other important actors to get first-hand information on cases of oil bunkering and illegal refineries. The on-the-spot assessment is based on the directive from President Muhammadu Buhari as part of a holistic strategy to deepen oil production in the country and effectively end illegal oil mining and associated threats in the sector.
When you see what is happening on the pipeline and the scale of what is happening, clearly is beyond any explanation, in the sense that we do have to take care of it in terms of security, in terms of technology. Maybe we haven't done enough on all of them, but I think I can see the traction today in the manner in which we approach these issues today, the combined efforts of the government security agencies, the community, and also the oil companies. We think this is a very different approach, and it will work out.
Given the factors that aid crude oil theft include inadequate security, poor community engagement, economic challenges, poor surveillance, stakeholder compromises and exposed facilities, the Operation Delta Safe Joint Task Force have begun shutting down many loopholes. The clampdown of illegal activity.
Well, interesting piece there. Well, let's continue this discussion because it remains a very important. Joining me virtually to assess the impact of crude oil theft, of course, on Nigeria's economy is partner commercial and energy law practice, CANDELP, Mr. Israel Aye. Good afternoon, Mr. Aye. How are you today? Mr. Aye, can you hear me?
Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Did you listen to that piece? Now, first, I want to ask you, what's your take with regards to the level of all theft? Look at the pictures. Look at what we saw. First, let's do an overview. What do you think? This looks like an institutionalized crime.
I mean, perhaps the only word I have essentially is there's probably no other way to put it. I mean, essentially, we have a crisis in our hands, and it's been a crisis making for years. And so, effectively, that's where we are. That we didn't do enough to stem this crisis, and the chickens, as they say, have come home to roost. And I tell you what I mean by that. That for the longest time, the unit cost per barrel of operating in Nigeria was higher than its contemporaries. And the elements that shot up the unit cost per barrel of operating in Nigeria were security, the slow regulatory cycle, and the sort of shallow contractual debt. In fact, we would say 2 of the 3 factors had to do with security and the likes of it. And we didn't fix that. And that shot, even when we had the same, even for countries we have identical tax rates as, we were generally not as competitive as them, for exactly this reason. But where we are today is that element of criminality, security, has morphed into what we now know as crude theft, and it is at a scale that is literally bringing the country down to its knees. I mean, when you have almost 80% of your daily production pilfered and wasted, with the corresponding damage to the environment, that from every point of view has to be seen as a crisis.
Now let's also look at the stages of this theft, because experts like you will tell us from the rig point to where it's passed to. Some are not fiscalized and all of that. Can you take us through some of these processes and how this is executed?
Well, I mean, again, listening to an industry expert of the caliber of Joe, then he talked about 3 factors, which made sense. I mean, he talked about theft along the lines, or what we might refer to as the point of origin, and then, of course, at the point of export at the terminals. And it seems to me that the one at the terminal is probably circumstantial. You know how it is when there's been a robbery, and then when there has been a robbery, and the bank officials can claim, I mean, we will tell you that, well, assuming 10,000 naira was stolen, and then the fellow says, oh, only 12,000 naira was stolen. You have no way of telling what was stolen. Okay, so that seems to me to be circumstantial. And of course, the third one is has to do with what was imported. That's completely it's a separate issue, in my opinion. So in that case, we're probably looking at the 2. And in those, I mean, amongst for the theft of the fuel along the lines, either from the point of production through the pipelines to the terminal, and the one at the terminal, it would seem to me that when you fix one, you probably have fixed 2, and then you may have stemmed the issue, which is crude theft act along the lines before it gets to the terminal. Because if nothing is stolen at all, then normal measurement facilities that are available at the terminal should be able to count for what amount of crude arrived at the terminal and what amount of crude was injected. You probably will be able to demand greater accountability. Unfortunately, that is not the case. What is the case right now is that the trunk lines are punctured at different points between where it is injected and before it gets to the terminal, with the result that what reaches the terminal, and sometimes I don't know how they get water into it, and so predominantly what arrives at the terminal is, it's water when it arrives at all, and then the volume that we can sell, fiscalize, whatever we call it, is greatly diminished, and we're all on our knees.
Now let's look at government's response now. At least for we're seeing government officials going there for on-the-spot assessment. The NNPC, Minister of State, and security operatives. Clearly, we see them going there to see what is happening on the spot. What would you say, or how would you react to this? What more can be done?
At the end of the day,
Mr. Israel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead. You're live.
All right. So I again apologize for that. Now, so like I was saying, that we didn't get here sudden. But here's, I mean, this is where we are. So, yes, I mean, those who have responsibility for, I mean, the variety of ways you can look at this. It's either you create a security cordon around the production facilities in order to be able to produce. But that probably is the smartest way to. Long-term solution. All right. Some of the underlying issues are the ones we already know. Sorry, it's reporting poor connection here. Can you hear me?
Just go ahead. You're live.
All right. So yeah. So exactly. So what we're saying in effect for that is to say probably what we are to rescue the situation. We probably need to create a security blanket behind which, I mean, just along the lines, hopefully. To be able to, because the salvage mission, it's like I said, it's an emergency. And I think that causal actions are some of the things that we should be intervening on and making sure that we deal with that so that we do not need to have to operate petroleum.
Network not really being friendly at all. All right, let's take a break and we'll try to see if we can reconnect with Mr. Israel Aye there. Poor network there from either end, but we'll try to see what we can work out. Let's take a break and return with this conversation. Don't go away, it's Business Nigeria. All right, glad to have you back. I still have Mr. Israel Aye, who's been speaking around crude oil theft and, of course, the impact on Nigeria's economy. Now, I'm looking at figures now that we have 4 billion lost to crude oil. A lot of figures. We can go on and on and on with NATI, OPEC. We have lots of figures. How do you think this will impact our economy, particularly at this time where we are grappling even for survival?
Okay, thank you very much, Tolu, and I apologize for the networks. But just sort of before I get to that,
yes, please.
You did ask me a question as to, how best we can approach this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we would have to set up a security cordon along those lines in the first instance. It's an emergency, and it would require that sort of intervention, but not for too long. We should also look for smarter ways. I mean, one of the things you do with tracking financial crime is following the money. For the sort of theft, so the grand theft that we're seeing, it takes the collaboration of a great number of people to be able to pull it off. Just like we did with money laundering on an international scale when we wanted to stem the terrorism, you started just to follow the money flow. This commodities are not being stolen and poured into the ground. It is not sabotage in that sense. It is theft. What it means is that some people are receiving stolen goods. As a country, we should be serious enough to be able to track those kinds of things and either punish the people who are engaged in it locally, or perhaps if there are international collaborators, then we can engage or employ, collaborate with multilateral organizations in order to do so. Stamp those crudes, make sure that, similar to what was done with blood diamonds, that those kinds of crude, wherever they show up, there should be a process by which they can be intercepted and reported and taken out of the market so that people would lose the economic incentive to participate in this. This has a likelihood of impoverishing an entire nation, and that is the level at which we should be intervening. Not this knee-jerk showing up at the place, taking off in our choppers hours later, and perhaps not doing anything. I believe that they're doing those kinds of things that we're talking about. We should inject that into the public space and discourse in order to be able to get the action. The question as to how it affects our economy, again, that's really a moot point. Unfortunately, we're still a monoproduct economy. At least up to 60 to 70% of our foreign exchange, depends on proceeds from crude sales, crude and gas sales. So it's a no-brainer, therefore, that if the majority of that is being pilfered, then we really are in dire straits, and somebody needs to do something very quickly.
Interesting stuff. I would also ask you about the miners that we see on all of these sites. Many talk about them that, illegality remains illegality, but what more can also be done? We're looking at the modular refineries and all of this artisanal refining. How does this help us to bridge refining gap? Can it do anything in any way?
Well, again, I would have to reference something that Joe said, to say that, look, and sometimes, and I find that people are doing this equivalence between what is going on and perhaps Silicon Valley, but it's a false equivalence. Because what was happening with Silicon Valley was that even though the activities of the hackers in the first instance was illegal per se, but it was employing innovation and creativity in order to be able to crack that space. And so all you needed to do was find a way to legitimize the activities and create a legitimate avenue, a channel for them to be able to express themselves. Unfortunately, that's not what is happening here. What is happening here is simply theft of established channels and the likes of it. Listen, if this was introducing innovation, creativity, we're finding smarter ways to be able to refine crude and the likes of it, then I will join the bandwagon to say, look, are we missing an opportunity here? But that's not what's happening. What is happening is that we're not only, because if you awarded some of these operators these licenses, then the entire business model disappears. They're not paying for the crude. They're wasting a vast majority of it. Not only wasting it, they're devastating the environment in the process. So it's a loss situation for us, and we need to stem it. Now, but remember what I said earlier on, that there's probably a need for us to fight. There's probably a need for us to address issues around issues around resource control agitations and those kinds of underlying issues that that the elephant in the room nobody's talking about. That's a separate issue. We need to address those. But with respect to the current activity, it's a negative and a double negative, and there is no benefit to anyone, to the collective in any way.
Let's wrap up this way. The oil and gas industry, particularly crude oil market, seems to be on the high side. Well, thanks to the ongoing war, Russia and Ukraine. Do you think this will remain moving on in the year?
Well, it's, again, look, in the context of the energy transition, it's difficult to predict when the cyclical nature of oil prices will end. Historically, for over a century now, the petroleum industry, oil especially, has had a cyclical pattern. The prices go up, and a number of things can affect prices. They go up, they come down. and then the investment cycles sort of rides that wave. But the thinking essentially is that with conversions and switching to maybe implementing amenities and things that probably don't require fossil fuel, that one of these days the prices will begin to dip and stay on the down low for forever. And you really don't know when that is. The thinking essentially is that they're probably going to have this up and down till about 2035 to perhaps 2050. After that, it's c'est la vie, perhaps. But here's where we are. The important thing is that in terms of the energy transition, the attitude of states like Nigeria is to maximize returns now, use the proceeds to diversify the economy away from oil to an infrastructure-based economy, maximize every moment. And that's really nobody in this car engine of an unfortunate event, but it's an opportunity to be able to earn more revenues. Unless we do those kinds of smart price regime would be a disadvantage to us. Every price regime will be a disadvantage, whether it's a low price regime, whether it's a high price regime. Unless we can, because again, we're talking about oil theft, which is really just a Unfortunately, due to poor management of the industry, including the non-development of our midstream, every price regime becomes a disadvantage. You know, it just really becomes an own goal. So, are we going to hope that another country gets up and bumps another one? I mean, we will not be responsible members of the global community, but it is what it is. When it happens, we should not be losing because we are unable to manage our own affairs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ezelaye, partner commercial and energy law practice, CANDELP. Thank you so much and do enjoy your weekend.